Okay, we're now recording. And the first thing I want to show you is actually not the stuff that I was talking about. I think I told you last night or Tuesday or something like that. There was one other piece of CSS that I would really love to be able to show you guys if we have time next week. Don't know if we're going to have time. It's only, basically, I mean, considering that Friday's gone, right? That's a test day. We got like 2 more days left of the class. So I don't see that we're going to have time. So I just want to go ahead and show it to you right now. What I wanted to show you was @FontFace. And until @FontFace came along, this is a CSS3 thing, you could only really use the fonts that were on the user's machine. So the user would come and pop into your website and your CSS would say, hey, use Optima. And the client machine, the user machine, would be like, oh, sorry, I don't have Optima on my machine. Guess what? They get Arial instead. And your whole design looks completely different, right? So it's just something we had to deal with for years and years. And now we've got @FontFace, and there are emporiums of web fonts that you can find and use online. This is one of them. This is the biggest one. There's also Font Squirrel. Your brain's not working, but there's 1 or 2 other ones out there as well. There's some that specialize in like comic book type fonts. Yeah, they're all over the place, but this is the really big one. And you can find some pretty decent typefaces on here to use in your project if you want to. So, and they usually put the most popular ones up top. This Lato or Lato has been popular for years. I think this might be one of the ones they use on Android systems, if I'm not mistaken. But let's say that you wanted to use this, then go ahead and tap on this, and it'll take you to the Lato page. You can select this file. First of all, you can just download the fonts if you want to. But if you select the style, then you can get this link and just put it right into your HTML, or, you know, they've got some CSS down here you can do at import as well. Put this in your CSS. And then, like, once you get this into your CSS, see where it says family equals font Lato? Then you can do like font family Lato in your CSS after that, instead of having to do like Arial or, you know, Georgia or something like that. So I'm not going to do a demo on that. Like I said, we don't have time, but just make sure you're aware of this up here and the fact that they pretty much give you the markup and or CSS that you need in order to use these fonts. So the fonts will be sourced this way instead of downloading them, but they also provide most or all of them for download. So just know that it's there. Fonts.google.com. If you don't remember that, just type in Google Fonts, or even just web fonts. That'll probably bring you here as well. So it does exist. There you go. So next up, I was saying at the beginning, you guys just want to open up some HTML page. It doesn't even matter which one it is. We're just going to play around in the browser for a little bit here. We do some vanilla JavaScript, as it's called, plain JavaScript, vanilla JS, and then we'll link to jQuery using a CDN, and then we'll be able to use that as well. So I don't know, I'm just going to open up a file here. This is the recording that I just got done with, so I've got the quiz and contact on here. I'm just going to open up Index for right now. So whatever browser you're in, you should be able to get to the console. Usually it's going to be Control-Shift-I or Control-Shift-J or something like that. If you don't remember the keyboard shortcuts, or if the keyboard shortcut you're used to isn't working in some whatever browser you're using at the time, then as far as I know, every modern browser, at least every modern desktop browser, you can right-click on any element and then go down to Inspect or Inspect Element or whatever it says there. Give me something like Inspect or something similar to that. And if I do that, it opens up the sidebar here. And I think if you're like Safari, it opens up down here, but you can always change that stuff in the preferences. So in this, you'll be able to access several things. First of all, this is the DOM. So the DOM up here, it looks like HTML, right? This is it stands for Document Object Model. So it means this is not your HTML, but it's the browser's model of your HTML. It makes an object of your HTML root, and then has nested elements with some properties inheriting and some not, and so on. And yeah, it's like the browser's picture of your HTML, and the browser actually uses this instead of your HTML in order to render the page here. What's the difference? Well, the difference is that this is modifiable. Your HTML is referred to as source code because that's implying it's like resources, right? It's like your resources subfolder in your root directory. It's the stuff that you don't modify. So your HTML is not going to be modified except by PHP or Java or something if you're using that on the back end. But like JavaScript, which is the front end stuff, it operates in the browser. It's never going to touch your markup. It's never going to touch your HTML page. I guess there is a way, but not through any normally used JavaScript. What it is going to do is it's going to operate on this guy right here. So this is the DOM, Document Object Model. You don't need to remember that when you get into front-end web development. You'll learn more about it. Notice that whenever I hover over here, it gives me a little hover state over here in the painted view. So if I want to know where this element is here, hover over the, oh yeah, there's the figure. And then look, here's the anchor. And then the image inside the anchor, okay, it's this guy right here. So yeah, you can just hover over all of these and it will give you these different elements over here. Even when this is open, you can go in and you can right click and go to inspect and it'll take you to a different place in the DOM. Now underneath that or to the side sometimes will be the styles, and this whatever element you have selected here, it'll show you what the CSS is. And you can play around with the CSS too. So I want to see what this looks like without the padding, and boom, just took it off. Or without the padding 0, right? So this has the padding that was delivered via, like earlier in the CSS. I want to take off the flex box, and oh yeah, that's what it looks like, and then I can bring it back again. Whenever a CSS rule has been coded, but it is not in effect for whatever reason, it'll put a strike through here, like this one. See if I can find some other ones down here. Okay, so these are like the browser. It says user agent style sheet, and it's in italic. These are the CSS that the browser's put on there. Some of these have been crossed out because we have modified them. At some point in the CSS, we did text decoration none for anchor links, and so their text decoration underline, which is the default, got crossed out. So enough said. I mean, that's what this stuff is basically about. You can see the box model stuff for all this down here too. Any changes you make go away when I refresh the page. There we go. We're back to the default. And no, I was wrong. We actually had this unchecked, and when I refreshed, it did not take that change away. Interesting. Okay. So what else do we have? Up here, if I drop down more, well, we've got several things that are useful here. The network here, if a file is going missing, or if you're like trying to access a third-party API online, cross-origin, and it's not working, you can go to network and find out what's missing and what kind of error message you're getting, whether it's a file not found or unlocated resource or whatever. And then the console here. Boom, this is the guy that we can play around with JavaScript. Or if we've got some JavaScript in our source code somewhere, then we can access the variables here. Or within the source code itself, we can tell that, like inside our script element on our HTML page, we can tell it to spit out a value here with the console object. So this is what we're going to start out playing with just a little bit here. And then we'll grab the jQuery CDN and then play around with that a little bit here, so just so you can see the difference. Okay, let me zoom in on this a little bit here. There we go. And let's just start out. I'm just going to type some values. So you guys probably want to have, like I was saying, open up your own HTML file and then bring up the browser here. Or sorry, bring up the console. And then just try typing some of this stuff along with me so you can get a sense of it. Some of you may have used JavaScript before, some of you may have not. I think a couple of you have already done C++, and a lot of this stuff, if you have, it'll look very similar because JavaScript is a C-based language, just like C++ and C# and Java and so on are all C-based languages. JavaScript is a little bit weird in some ways. It's kind of like the odd sibling out of all of them. It's not a typed language. For those of you who know what I mean, it's a loosely typed language, which means you do not have to declare types on variables, and the type on a variable can change anytime just by changing the value. So anyway, I'm going to do that stuff later on. Let's just type a string. So a string is going to be anything in quotes, either singles or doubles. If you use singles, just be careful not to put a plain apostrophe anywhere in there because that'll end the string. But I think that it's common when you're first doing a language to do a hello world. So I will go ahead and do that. I've put it in single quotes here, which makes it a string. If I just hit enter now, I just type in a value into the console and hit enter, it's going to return that value. So it's just said, hey, it's like it's saying hello world back to me, right? It's like, oh, greeting, cool, okay, whatever. But I can't access this anymore. I can't access the string anymore because I didn't create a variable for it. I didn't store it anywhere. I didn't create a reference. So let's say I do something like this instead. There's a few different ways to declare variables in JavaScript, and it has constants now too. But the most commonly used method right now is to use the let keyword. I know there's a lot of JavaScript out there that uses var instead, and you still can use var, but let is in some ways a lot better. We've had it since, I don't know, 2015 or so, 2016. So let's say I do let greeting, which is my variable name, equal hello world, like so. And when I've got this, you're really supposed to put, like at the end of every statement, you're supposed to have a semicolon. And I really should teach you that method since I'm teaching you JavaScript. So whenever I remember to, I'll go ahead and put one in. You'll see me forget it sometimes, guaranteed, no matter how hard I try. And the truth is that in JavaScript, you can often leave this off and it works just fine. That's not the case with other C-based languages. If you try that in PHP, your whole page will break, or at least everything after the missing semicolon will break on your page. It's no good. But if I forget to do it in JavaScript, it's not a big deal. It's another one of the quirks of JavaScript. A third one is that, well, no, let's not get into that later. Okay, so this time I did let greeting equal hello world, and the hello world part is the same, right? Except this time I've assigned it to a variable. And this time it didn't return anything. This time it returned the same value. If I just give it a value, it spits it back at me. This time it didn't. It returned undefined. So nothing is returned from this. But now I can do greeting, and it gives me hello world. Okay, so that's just simple variable stuff. So again, for those of you who've done any C++, you guys are yawning right now. You're going, yeah, I know what a variable is. But not everybody does necessarily. If all you've done is HTML and CSS, those are declarative programming languages. A lot of people would say they weren't programming languages at all. They are. They're declarative programming languages, which means they're things like variables and functions are largely absent from them. You're used to using building blocks. You think of HTML as like Legos, right? You're building a structure with bricks, more or less. Now, there are different kinds of bricks, but still, they're all just bricks. CSS is a little bit different because now in CSS3, you actually do have some things that look like variables or functions. And they kind of even sort of behave that way. But in a way, you're kind of giving up our separation of concerns that way. But it's all right. They're welcome enough that people don't worry about it too much. So anyway, I was going to say, like in procedural or functional programming language, like JavaScript, when I remember my very first days trying to learn JavaScript, and I couldn't get my head around what a variable was. It's just like, wait a minute, why use greeting? Why not just say hello world? If that's what you mean, then just say hello world. I wish that someone had told me, it didn't take me long to get past that, but I wish someone had told me on day one to remember my, remember my algebra from high school. Now don't worry, we're not going to be doing any algebra in here. I know you guys, it's one of the best things about getting out of high school. You don't do that stuff anymore. But I wish someone had mentioned that to me on day one of JavaScript, that yeah, you remember in high school where you did x equals 3, and then you could put x into some kind of, function or something and spit out an answer, and then the answer would change if you change x equal to something else. That's all a variable is, and that's all this is too. It's a reference for the value, and the value can change. And so what's important is having the reference for it. So anyway, enough said. I can change this value here in JavaScript by doing greeting equals. Notice I'm leaving off the let keyword here. Let's say I'm ready to say goodbye. And then if I do greeting, then I get the new value. Now here's what I was saying about being loosely typed. It doesn't even have to be the same the same type of data. I can later on say, you know what? I want greeting to be a number now. So I'm going to do greeting equals 4. Okay? No problem. It's now 4. So it's not only changed the data type or the value, but it's changed the data type as well. It does it on the fly implicitly. If you give it a new value, then it just converts it right over without telling you. That's often a good thing. Sometimes it can lead to unexpected results if you're not paying attention. Okay, so enough said. That's just a couple of little simple primitive data types. Collections, just very quickly, if you've got a collection of multiple things that you need to store, then you can use something called an array or something called an object. So an array, let's go ahead and declare a variable right here off the bat. I'm going to say let r, something like that. We'll keep it nice and generic, equals. And I don't know, let's go ahead and just do a couple of these things. So I'll do hello and goodbye. And these are my two items within the array. So if I then type in R, it shows me that collection with square brackets around. This is probably the most convenient way to create an array. And that's it's called an array literal. And then if I want to access the array, then I can use numeric keys in order to get some of that stuff. So I can do R0. That will be the first item in the array. Hello. This is all zero based, so the first item is almost always 0. And will be that way at least until you get into MySQL, I think. And then if I do R1, it's actually the second item, which is goodbye. Let's say I want to loop through these so that I get both of the responses or both of these items sequentially. So I want to split them both out onto the page or something like that. We won't do that yet. But there are several different loops in JavaScript. The classic for loop, those of you who've done C++ or just C, you know all about that. We won't do that here because JavaScript has some rather friendlier ones these days. It didn't used to. Now it does. But let's say I do something like for let I of R, and I is just something that's just going to be used within this block. And let's do a console.log. All right. Now this, by the way, console, I didn't spell that right. Console.log, this is also what you use in your actual JavaScript file or in your HTML file in the script element if you want to spit something out to the console here. You do a console with a log method on it. And this is, yeah, it's just, like I said, it's a sandbox, it's a testing ground. If you wanted to spit out a variable and see what the value of it is at any time, then you usually do a console.log. The older method is to use an alert, and you don't really want to do that because if you forget about one in your code, it'll like pop up right here, and these will have to click out of it and so on. You don't want that. But like most of the users who encounter your web page will never see this stuff back here. It's just for us, for our eyes only. I'll go ahead and close that off. So if you've done CSS before, and you guys have, this looks probably familiar, these curly braces on the code block. In CSS, this is where the selector would be, and then you'd have property value pairs in here. But this is a for loop. If I hit enter right now, then it gives me the two items of the array, hello and goodbye. And this time it did it sequentially. So not one piece as an array and not one of them at a time, like hello and then goodbye, but both of them looped through the array and did it. So this is one kind of array in JavaScript. And like I said, there are several others. This is not the only kind of collection. There is, well, there's a lot of them actually. There's, I guess the next one you should learn about are an object. And for those of you, I'm hesitating because those of you who have done an actual object-oriented language before, like C++, objects might seem a little strange in JavaScript. Okay, just hang with it and be aware that if you're expecting them to behave in a certain way, then they're going to be a little bit different. That's all I'll say for right now. I can't go into it too much because then the people who haven't done any kind of scripting before are going to be, well. But anyway, let's go ahead and make a simple object literal. So this is like an array literal where you just have items in here and it's surrounded by the square brackets. If I did the same thing but surrounded by these curly braces here, then what I can do is I can have name and value pairs. So let's go ahead and try this. I'm going to do let obj equal. And this time, instead of the square brackets, I'll do the curly braces. And we'll have property and value pairs. So this actually will be fairly close to the CSS rule that we know about because of the property value pairs. So I don't know, let's just say 1, and the value of 1 is the number 1. So colon, and then the value, and then in CSS it would be a semicolon, but here it's going to be a comma. And then the value of 2 is 2, and then the value of 3 is 3. And then the last one, you can put a comma after this. The JavaScript actually allows trailing commas. Like I could have put a comma here after this last item in the array. Most C-based languages do not allow that, but JavaScript does. JavaScript is very loosey-goosey. It allows a lot of stuff. Okay, I'll close off the curly brace, and then let's go ahead and do obj here, and there's my object. So instead of just a collection of values, it's a collection of names and values. Think of it as like properties and values like in CSS. 1, 1, 2, 2, and 3, 3. Okay, so the last thing I'm going to do before we jump into the jQuery is let's take a look at another kind of object and then loop through it really quickly. And this object is going to be an HTML collection or node list. There's a slight difference between those two, but for now you can think of them as the same thing. And what it is a collection of items on the page. But remember the DOM. This is not going to be a collection of items in your HTML. It's a collection of items within the DOM. So let's go ahead and grab these anchors up here and just spit them out over here. So I'm going to say let A equals, now this one is going to be a little bit longer. Vanilla JavaScript, they tend to use long names within the language itself, which I actually appreciate because that leaves some of the shorter names available for us coders to use on a regular basis. If they were all short names, then we would have to remember, like, oh yeah, I can't use like the keyword doc or something like that. So instead they do these really long ones that you're not going to forget and you're not going to accidentally use them yourself, meaning something else. Let me go ahead and make this a little bit wider because this one is going to be a bit wider. There we go. So check this out. So document, so that is the root element of the document, of the document object model. And there are various properties or methods you can run on that. Put a dot, and then let me do a query selector. Oh, I told you it was kind of a long one, right? But document query selector all, and if you're thinking, oh wait, we just used the word query. What were we talking about? Oh yeah, jQuery. That's what it's basically named after. It's named after jQuery. Some of the stuff we can do with this property in JavaScript actually first appeared in jQuery. And then everyone's like, oh yeah, this is really useful. We better get this into JavaScript. So document query selector all, what I can do is I can use any CSS query inside quotes inside the parenthesis of that method. So this is the document object. I'm running a query selector all on it, and then I tell it what kind of thing that I want it to look for on the page. So again, you guys know about CSS selectors, right? You know about type selectors where you're just selecting for like div or section or whatever. You know about ID selectors, so I can select for like hash page and it'll grab you the div ID equals page, that sort of thing. So I'm just going to grab, let's go do nav A. I don't know if there are other, I think there might be another anchor down here somewhere. So I just want to grab the ones that are inside the navigation, these four guys. So here it is, let A equal document.query selector all nav A. And then let's check out A here. Is that what I did? Let A, yeah, A. And it gives us this node list. And it's got the 4 anchors in it. Now this might look like, yeah, I don't know how that makes it. Look at all these, oh my God, I can't deal with this stuff. Yeah, if you don't want that stuff, then let's do a loop through it. I can't remember off the top of my head if this for of loop is going to work over a node list. I have a feeling it won't, but I'm still going to try it because this is the one we've learned. So let's give it a shot here. Maybe it'll work. For that I of A this time. And I can reuse I because I was only used for the duration of this loop up here. It basically disappeared. It got garbage collected once the loop closed off. So I can use it again. And let's do console.log I, just like we did with the array up there. And there we go. So it did work, actually. So here are those 4 elements. The first anchor with index, then learning, then gallery, then quiz. So that's just showing a couple of different loops, one with an array and the other one with grabbing things off of this guy right here. And if I know how to do that, then I can start affecting things on the page. And this really is the last thing I do before jQuery. Let's say I do the I of A, just like we just did. And it does that autofill thing very, without even being asked a lot of the time. Let's say I do I dot style dot color equals red. And let's go ahead and try that. And when I hit enter, so I just changed something on the page here. So not only can you grab elements off the page, but you can change the page. Now this is, again, I'm going to say it one more time, this did not change any of my source code documents. This didn't change my HTML, it did not change my CSS file. It's only here for the duration of this guy right here. Once I refresh the page, like I'm going to do right now, or actually no, I'll hold off for a second, but when I refresh the page, this will all disappear, like it's gone. It's just in the JavaScript and that's it. So that's what makes JavaScript so powerful. I mean, you can have a very interactive and fluid interface here by using a combination of CSS and JavaScript. It'll affect behaviors. It'll grab data from the user by using forms like we're going to do. It can update CSS based on user choices. It can show or hide content. It can take you to an entirely different version of the website if you come from a different kind of browser by detecting the user agent. There's just so much you can do with JavaScript and CSS combined. It's hard to imagine what the web would be like right now if we did not have JavaScript. And in the very first iterations of the web, we did not have JavaScript. I think it was Netscape that first allowed developers to get a peek under the hood at how the browser was doing things and maybe to start affecting things ourselves at the same time. Now I should be able to, if I wanted to, no, I can't. Okay, there we go. So I clicked into something I'd already typed here and then hit Control-A on the keyboard, and it's going to select a lot of this stuff, including some of the responses from the browser. And if I then go to the text editor and paste, and it doesn't like it. Let me try it again. I'm sure I've done this from some browser or another. Maybe if I right-click on this, and so this is only allowing me to click. Let's see, let me just copy it. There we go. So it didn't like the shortcuts for some reason, but eventually when I did the right-click and got the context menu, it did allow me to copy and paste all this stuff into a new file, including a bunch of stuff that may or may not need. But like if you ever try something and it works out really cool in the console there, go ahead and do a copy and paste so you can save it for yourself. Because otherwise, when I refresh this, it's gone. So the CSS that I added via JavaScript is gone. Now, if I've still got this window open, I can still access some of the things that I already typed in here by hitting the up key on the keyboard. It's actually one of the more important techniques in the console. Sometimes you have to refresh in order to clear out some error or something or another. Then I hit up on the keyboard and look at that. I got the last thing I just typed. Now, if I hit enter now, it's going to give me an error because it no longer knows what A is. In order to get A back, I have to arrow up until I get this guy here. Now I've got the A variable back, and now I can go back to this, and it'll work again. So that's the console. You can do any JavaScript at all, any jQuery at all, any Vue at all, anything like that. You're going to be making constant pit stops here in order to check things out and test things out and debug things and so on. Okay, so now we're actually going to start using our HTML page. So if you don't have an HTML page open in your coding environment, whatever that is, Notepad++, whatever, open one up, or create a new one if you want, if you must. But probably a good idea to go ahead and crack open just anything you've got, exercise file, whatever. I've got some of my demo files handy here. Let's see, I don't need to keep this guy. There we go. So I'll probably just, I guess I'll go ahead and put this into quiz. When I do a demo in here, I'm going to be using these guys. I'm going to do the recording this weekend. So yeah, I'll go ahead and get a start on this. So let me open up quiz in the browser as well. So there we go. There's my quiz. Notice I click on the link and it keeps the console over here as long as it's in the same tab. And these are just some of the forms. I've not even styled these yet. These look terrible. I'll do at least a little bit of styling this weekend and then share the file with you or whatever. So let's grab jQuery, because jQuery does make some of this stuff a little bit more fun, I think. So you don't have to type in like document.querySelector_all or anything crazy like that. In a browser, I'm going to open up and I'm going to type in jQuery. And there are many places that you can get to online, or you can download jQuery and use it in your own files. But I recommend using a CDN, Content Delivery Network or Code Delivery Network, depending on who you ask. And the one that I use the most often is CDN.js. Let's see. Yeah, CDN.js. So it's just the more commonly used libraries are available in CDN. And so there it is, jQuery on cdnjs.com. If I tap on that, then it gets this guy. And then it'll give you, like in this kind of russet color, what it suggests that you use. There are like different kinds of jQuery. You call them sub-jQueries or modules of jQuery, I guess that would be. But just go ahead and grab the top one here. And you can copy the URL or copy the entire script tag. Go ahead and copy the entire script tag here. It's the second one here. It shows the brackets with the slash, so it's supposed to go in your HTML. Just click on it and it copies it. And once you get that done, you can go ahead and paste it right into your HTML page. Now, I bet that some of you, instead of coming here, have gone to like jQuery.com to look for the CDN there. That is totally doable. I really find this easier. Like once I come to this, like it's right there. Super simple. No question about which version or what module or anything like that. Just go ahead and grab the top one. I'm going to go to my not my browser, my coding environment here, and I'm doing quiz.html. So here's what you want to do. Just like the link for your CSS belongs in your head tag, your script elements, which is what you do JavaScript in or source JavaScript in, should always be one of two places. They should always be at the bottom of your head element or at the bottom of your body element, inside the body element or inside the head element. And this is the way it's normally arranged. If you're calling in a library, I'm going to go ahead and paste now up here. And if you're using a library, generally speaking, you want to call it in up here at the top before your page loads. So the JavaScript library is actually loaded before your DOM is. And then to make use of that library, you go ahead and put a script tag down here. So let's take a look at this guy here before I do. So this is a script. Here's the closing script tag. And all the stuff in between is just various attributes that can go on the script tag, like source. This is the important one. Like you could get rid of all the rest of this stuff here, like all that stuff, and do this. And as long as you have the source, as far as I know, things would still work. But it's not a problem. Just go ahead and leave it in there. The script has an opening and closing tag, unlike the link, because you can actually put JavaScript in the middle here. Now, for various reasons, it's not recommended that you put it into the same script tag that you use to call in the library. You could, but I don't think it would necessarily always lead to good things. So what I'll do is I'll put a second script tag down here at the bottom. Yeah. Okay, slow down, Bispo. There we go. And then I put JavaScript and or jQuery down here. That's the basic pattern. Now I'm going to leave the script tag down here because later on I'm going to do some stuff with this. But I think to start with, I'm just going to save this and then I'm going to do what I was doing before with the JavaScript. I'm just going to pop right into the browser console and try out some things in jQuery here. And we'll do some of the same stuff that we were just doing in JavaScript, but we'll do it in jQuery instead. So once you get this guy in there, you don't even need to get the script tag down here at the bottom. Just go ahead and paste this in to the bottom of the head element. Usually goes right last at the end. Your scripts go right at the end of the head element, underneath the link and title and so on. Then go ahead and save. So before I go any further, let me just ask, is anybody having trouble accessing the CDN or finding the file or finding this piece of code to copy and paste? If you are, do let me know, because you won't be able to go much further without this or something like it. I'm going to assume at least a couple of you are not being truthful, and I'll give you another moment before I start doing anything else. Okay, just to reiterate, I got here just by going to Google and typing in jQuery CDN.js. If you don't remember this, you just remember Code Delivery Network, CDN, and you'll be able to find it. So here is like from jQuery.com. You can get it from here too. And then at some point down here, there we go, the third entry is that CDN.js, and you can just pop over there and grab it. Okay, so I have made a change to my source code. Let me make sure I saved here. I can't remember if I did or not. Yes, I did. So quiz.html, there it is. It is unit 12. Okay, good. So I've made a change to the source code by putting those two script tags in there. So I have to refresh this in order to see those changes. And now let's take a look at the jQuery version of some of what we just did in JavaScript. Now, we're not really going to be able to do all of it. There are some things that you still want to do with plain old vanilla JavaScript. Like if you have an array to create, right? Like let me see if I can still go up here and grab it. Yeah, there it is. So if you still have an array to create, you don't really want to do that in jQuery. Just go ahead and do it in JavaScript. I mean, it's simple enough, right? I've got the R here just like before. What jQuery is really good at is grabbing stuff off of the DOM and doing stuff to it. So there's quite a bit of JavaScript that you do just plain old JavaScript. And then when you need to interact with the DOM, that's when you go ahead and use jQuery or, something like Vue or whatever. So let's go ahead and take a look at the differences. So the first thing we did in JavaScript that had to do with the DOM was this guy, where we did let a equal document.querySelectorAll nav a. Let's do that in jQuery instead. So I'm going to do let a equal, and jQuery is made famous the use of the $sign here. JavaScript reference naming conventions, which means variable names and constant names and so on. There are only certain characters you can use. You can use letters, you can use numbers, you can't begin it with a number. So I could say, index 4 for a variable name, but I could not say for index. That wouldn't work. I can use letters, I can use numbers past the first character, I can use underscores, and I can use $signs. As far as I know, those are the only characters that are commonly used in JavaScript identifiers, and might be the only ones that are even allowed. So $$ has been very popular with libraries, not just jQuery. I created a library that uses $$ myself. I mean, it's just one of those things. It gets used a lot. But I think jQuery is the one that made it famous. So this is a function, which means that after $, you're going to have a pair of parentheses, always. Well, no, most of the time. There are exceptions like $.each and so on, but almost always you're going to have these parentheses right after the $sign. And then remember, when we did the document query selector all, and then there were pair of parentheses and pair of quotes, and then inside the quotes we could do a CSS selector like nav a. Well, guess where they got the idea? jQuery was the one to do it first, or at least it was before we were able to do it in JavaScript. The idea that you could just put a CSS selector in here and select any element on the page. So let's go ahead and do the same thing. Nav a, all right? Grabbing the same kind of thing. Should really put a semicolon there. I often don't. Same thing, it returns undefined, and then if I type a, then it gives me the first one here. I was forgetting about that. If you just use $, like a selector, and you don't attach any methods to it, then it just gives you the first one. I was forgetting about that. But there are methods that you can attach to this, and as soon as you do, it starts selecting for all of them. So I can't remember. Let me see what we did with our document query selector here. Nav A, and then we looped through those and logged into the console. And then, okay, so we changed the color of each of these. We did let I of A, and then that was the document query selector all, and we changed the color of each of those to red on the page. So let's go do the same thing in jQuery. So I'm going to start with this guy right here, and nav A. So again, there's our CSS selector. It's inside the parentheses with the $ preceding it, which is the function name. And then I'm going to attach a method. So a method is a function that begins with a dot. Basically, it's attaching a function to this object. And we're going to change the CSS. And the CSS property that we're going to change is color. And we're going to change it to red. So it looks a little bit different, but it's definitely shorter, right? It's shorter than doing the document.query selector A and then looping through it and doing this whole thing. Let's go ahead and check it. And, oh, it doesn't like it. Nav A is not a function. And, you know what, it doesn't. This is bugging me. I'm wondering if this is quiz, right? Hang on a second. Okay, so this is not working, and I'm not sure why. I was forgetting, so what I was saying before, I was saying, oh yeah, this is only returning the first one. I've forgotten about that. It's surprising. Actually, what this is doing, there's a dollar function that's available within this console that's not available in JavaScript generally, but that's available in the console if you're not doing this. But I don't know why the JavaScript is not working, so let's figure that out. I'm going to go to Elements and make sure that I actually have that in here. And it is not in there. And why? I wonder if I'm in the wrong folder here. I bet you I am. This is, I bet this is recordings. Hang on, let me open up a different folder here. File management, right? Haven't I been harping on that? And yes, this is recordings. This is the other unit 12. Now, I knew I was going to run into trouble with that by naming these folders the same thing. Okay, let me pop in here. And so this is demos unit 12. And then I'll go to quiz, and here we go. All right, so yes, file management. I should probably namespace those a little bit better. Okay, so now, now I go over here and refresh, and now I should be able to look up jQuery and see what it is, and yes, it's now a function. Oops, let's try that again. There we go. It's returning a function, so here we go. It's been a long week. So let's go ahead and do this again. I'm going to do the $nav A, and we'll do CSS.css and color and red. There we go. And enter, and now we do it. Okay. And it returns this jQuery object that contains all of these guys. And now that we've done that, now I bet we can do the let A equals, and then nav A and have it return the entire set instead of just the one. And A, yeah, there we go. So there's the same JavaScript object that gets returned, or a jQuery object. Okay, so this is the difference. So the original, we had to do like let A equal document.query selector all nav A, and then we had to loop through that with a for of loop or some other kind of loop, and then tell it to turn each item of the loop, change the CSS to color red. With this, we're able to do it all in one line. Now, that's a lot shorter, but there's something more important about jQuery, and that is this is not the only method that I can do. I can chain these methods. I want to say every method. As far as I know, every method in jQuery is chainable. So I could do .css color red and then attach another one over here. So let's say I do something like this. .first. And then .css color red. And I should be able to just change the CSS of just the first one. And there it is. So this is what I mean about chaining methods. So here is the basic selector right here, the dollar in the parentheses, and then we did dot first, which means grab the first one of those, and then dot CSS, change the CSS of that one item. And there we go. So that's the idea behind CSS. It makes it very easy to select for items and very easy to change multiple things by daisy chaining these methods. It's also fully nestable in the way that, everything is done in almost exactly the same way every time. It makes it very organic and very easy to remember how to use it once you get the hang of it. So let's go ahead and select something else here. And here is my heading H1. Let's change that to something else. I'm going to select for header H1. I could just use H1. It's the only one on the page, so let's go ahead and do that. And let's say I want to change the text content up here. Then I can use a dot text. And let's just say, hello, jQuery. So now it's not just something I'm changing in the CSS or anything like that, but I'm actually changing the content up here. And again, this is just done on the fly. It's not done to the actual document, just to the document object. And let's go ahead and let's see, what else do I want to do today? Just a couple more things. Let's go ahead and do a click event. This is one of the main things that you do in JavaScript is you attach events to objects so that you can get user input and update the navigation or update the interface accordingly. So let's go ahead and try one of those. I'm going to do, let's go ahead and grab the whole page here, I think. So I'll do hash page. And we'll attach a click event to it. So that means anywhere on the page the user clicks, something will happen. So dot click. And then if you actually want something to happen here other than just putting a generic click event on the page, then you can put a callback in here. Compose this. So function, this is inside all over the click method here. And let's just say console.log. And actually, I'm going to put in the event object up here as well. So I'm just passing a variable into this anonymous function. Console.log e.target. So e just means what is the actual element that has been acted upon by this user event here, this click. So when the user clicks anywhere on the page, it's going to say what specific element did they click on. Because for some reason in my interface I need to know that. So I'll close off the curly brace, but then the thing to notice is that this whole function is contained within this method parenthesis, so I have to close that too. This is something that this is the basic pattern of jQuery, right? Where you've got some kind of method that you open up into a function, and then you might have other jQuery statements inside of here as well. So let's go ahead and do this. And now it's returned the jQuery object. Nothing's happening yet. All we did was attach a method, an event here, so the page is now listening for a user click on this div page somewhere. Now I'm going to avoid these guys because if I click one of those, it's going to take me away from the page. I don't want that. But let's say I click on my H1 up here, and it's telling it to tell the target and spit it out here in the console. And there it is. So I just clicked on the H1 and it shows, hey, there's the H1. I'll click on my H2. There it is. I'll click on one of these guys here. Now this should actually return two elements because not only am I going to be clicking, if you watch the video you know what I'm talking about, the recording. If I click on this, I'm actually going to be focusing this element as well. So I click there, it focuses this form, and it returns the label that I clicked on and also the input that has been focused. Here's the reset button. Here's the button itself, except that refreshed the page. And it gets rid of everything. If I want to get that click event back again, use the up arrow. There it is, and then I can once again start using these guys here. So that is something that we've just done. Now, normally this is just for testing, right? You don't normally, like spitting stuff out into the console is not actually useful for your interface. Generally speaking, you're going to do something else instead. So maybe I'll do something else here. Let me go ahead and refresh the page, and I will do hash page dot click function, and I don't think we need the event object right now. I'm just going to change, actually, yeah, I do want the event object. And let's change the content of the H1 so that it is e.target. Remember before we were having e.target spit out in here to the console. Well, let's spit it out to the page instead. Let's say the H1 changes. Whenever the user clicks on here, the text content of the H1 will now be the target that they clicked on here. Let's give it a shot. So this is going to be nested jQuery now. So I've already got the page being acted on with jQuery. Now I'm going to grab our H1 inside of here. .text. Remember, that's the text content. And let's say e.target. Let's see if this even works. It might just say something like object up here. In fact, I have a feeling that's going to happen. Let's try it. So close that off, close the parenthesis up here, and then return. And let me go ahead and click on the H2. And yeah, it's just showing object. So it's showing the object HTML heading. So if I wanted to do something here, well, I would have to do something more if I actually wanted it to show like something useful like what we were seeing over here. This is actually a good lesson in JavaScript in general. Sometimes if you take an object and spit it out to the page, it won't give you the value of that object. It'll just say, oh yeah, this is an object. Nice job, dude. But at least we can see how this is working and updating content in the page. So I click on the header and it's showing the HTML element. If I click on the H1 or the H2 heading element, if I click on this guy, the input element, and so on. We'll do one more thing, a couple more things, and then we'll be done. Let's go ahead and refresh this page here and clean it out. I am going to select for this reset button down here. A reset button can sometimes be used as a way to, what it's really there for is to clear out the form here. So if I put in some values here and then I think, oh, you know what, maybe I was wrong, I put in my email address wrong, whatever, reset it, empties those out. And sometimes it's a way to grab those values too. So let's see, what is it? Let me make sure what I want to do here. First, let's go ahead and let's go ahead and do the whole caboodle here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to attach an event to the reset, and then I'm going to have that select all of the ones that I have checked over here, that I've selected, and have it spit out to the console. Okay, so I will attach the click event to this reset button here. Now, if I take a look at my source code, here's the reset down here. It's an input, just like these radio inputs up here. And on the contact page, just like the text fields and the email fields and so on, almost all form elements in HTML are inputs. There's only a few exceptions, I think. So how do I select for this one? Like, what if I want to select this but not all these other inputs? It doesn't have a class on it or anything, so how do I do that? Well, in CSS has some great selectors now they added in CSS3. They go well beyond just the selectors that we've learned in this class so far. And one of them is an attribute selector. So I can actually select something based on whether or not it has an attribute. And I can also select for something based on what the value of that attribute is. So in this case, I'm going to select for something that has type equals reset on it. That's the only one of those on the page. There's type equals radio, but no other type equals reset. And by the way, this is not just jQuery. This works in CSS as well. Remember, jQuery just selects based on CSS selectors. And so here's what that looks like. It's going to be in square braces in here, square brackets, and I can just do type equals reset. And that's going to select for that guy. Let's check it out. And you'll open it up. There's the input item, and well, it's in here somewhere, but the type, anyway, it got it. Okay, it got that one input out of all of them. So let's go ahead and use this. I'm going to attach a click event just to this one here. So, okay. Dollar, square bracket, type equals reset. If you don't have any spaces or punctuation, then you don't even need to put double quotes around the reset. You can, and if you have something like a title that has words and spaces and stuff, then you use the double quotes there, but it's not actually necessary if it's just something like this. You can also put the element name in here, so I can do input type equals reset. But if there's nothing else on the page that's going to have type equals reset, I can just do this. Okay, so let's attach a click event. And let's see, I don't need the, I've said this 3 times now, but I think this time I really do not need the event object. So I'm just going to do, oops, what am I doing? Function. And then tell it what to do inside of this function. So when the user clicks here, what we're going to do is we're going to do another selector inside of here, another jQuery function. And this one is going to select for another cool selector in CSS3. In fact, this may exist in CSS2, I can't remember. But this is going to select everything that has been checked. So all the checkboxes or radio buttons in this case that have been clicked on and focused so that it's just got selected either true or false. And that is with this pseudo selector here, checked. Now we've seen this kind of pseudo selector before. Remember when we demoed, and some of you did in your own projects, you did like a hover in order to get a hover state on your anchor link. Same kind of thing. In this case, it is input checked, which means the input has been selected. And if you wanted to simplify it, then you could just do this guy right here, just checked. This is your basic loop in jQuery, .each. So if you just want to do some generic thing to each of these, then use .each. It's like the for of loop that we looked at earlier, or for each, or the classic for loop, something like that. The jQuery version is just .each. And we'll do another function. Hopefully you can see what I mean about this being organic. Like this line, look how this is structured exactly the same as this one, right? And sometimes you can get into like what they call callback hell, where you just keep these, constantly nested inside of each other, and then you have to like close a bunch of brackets and go back out, and you wind up with this kind of sideways mountain over here like this. Not that you ever want to get into callback hell, but this is what I mean when I say jQuery is very organic. The same pattern just repeats itself over and over. Some people call it fractal, right? You see the same pattern on the large scale as on the small scale. And that's one of the things that makes it so eminently usable. I mean, there's the fact that it's so consistent across browsers, and then there's the fact that it takes a lot of verbose commands in JavaScript and makes them shorter and more concise and easier. And then there's this, which I think is the most important aspect of it. It's basically all the same with very few exceptions. So right now I'm doing looping through the checked. So all these guys that have been clicked on and selected. And we can do something very similar with this. Let's do console.log. And, well, let's keep it simple. Let's just do this. So each of these checks that have been selected, when we click on reset, it will dump it out to the console here. Okay, so I've got to close off the each there. So again, the curly brace and then the parenthesis. And then I'll do it again. Curly brace and parenthesis, this time closing this guy up here. Now let's give it a try. I'm going to select some of these guys. I'm going to true, false, and true, which as it turns out is actually the correct answers for my little quiz here. And I'm going to click on reset, and it spits these guys out here. So it grabs the 3 that were checked, and before this had a chance to reset and empty those out, it pulled those out. And look at it's got these values. Value equals true, value equals false, value equals true, which are the 3 things that I checked. So let's do something slightly different here. So this is what I did before. If you ever want to like change something just a little bit, and I don't want to run the risk of like putting another click event on this poor reset button, then just refresh the page. That empties everything out except that I can still hit the up arrow on the keyboard and get to the last thing that I did. So I'm going to go back here, and instead of doing let's see, what is it that I want to do? Well, let's go ahead and try a simple one first. No, you know what? We're doing jQuery. Let's stick with jQuery. So almost all of this is jQuery at this point. This thing right here, obviously, is the simply JavaScript. We were able to do that, just before we even called in the jQuery library. But most of this is jQuery here. So let's go ahead and stick with it. I'm going to take, instead of just doing this like we just did, let's put it inside its own jQuery wrapper, and then .val. So the value of each of these here. Now, if I wanted to do it in plain old JavaScript, then I could do that too. I could do this without the $sign and do a value property, not a method, but a property. But let's go ahead and stick with the jQuery here. So $this.val. And I guess the double parenthesis because it's closing this method at the same time. And now we do close curly brace, close parenthesis, return. Keep doing that until you get back out to the root indent, right? So now, here's what this says. If the reset button is clicked on, then grab everything on the page that has been checked, which can only be form elements, and loop through those and grab the value from each one and spit it out to the console here. All right, check it. Let's try this. This time I'm going to do false, true, and false, which is all the wrong answers. I'm going to click on reset. Looky here. False, true, and false. Do any of you see how this might be useful to an interface? I'm now using forms not in the way that they were originally intended, and which they're still often used for, which is to grab user data and fire it off to a server to either send an email or get stored in a database or get run through some business logic somewhere. I'm now using it on the same page without the page refreshing. Now, this in the case, I've only put them out to the console here, and that's all we're going to do tonight. I think we've done enough right here. But I can use this basic method up here, this basic procedure, in order to, for instance, tell the user which questions they got right or wrong by comparing this against an array of correct answers that I have already done in JavaScript. I can tell them how many they got right at the top of the page. Said, yay, you got 2 out of 3 right. Or, hey, you got 1 out of 3 right. Want to try again? And give them a link to refresh the page so that these all empty out, or to reset this or whatever. This is what it's all about right here. Not all of it, but quite a bit of it is about grabbing user data either through click events or through form inputs, grabbing the data from them and then updating their interface in some way. That all happens on the front end. It happens in the browser, and most of it does not require any communication with the back end, with the server, with the database, or anything like that. Without JavaScript, every single thing we wanted to change, we would have to update the entire page, which would mean firing the user input off to the back end, having it processed somewhere there, and then spitting out a new HTML page for every click, for every dropdown, for every everything. But with JavaScript, we can do it all asynchronously here in the browser and without really contacting or communicating with the server. That's not to say that JavaScript cannot communicate with the server. It actually can in certain ways by using something called fetch, or the older version of that is Ajax. If you take front-end web development later on, you'll learn about those guys. We're not going to do that here. All we're going to do is just a little bit of interface updating. Next week, instead of just putting this data out here into the console, we will actually do what I was just talking about, where we will update the page to tell the user which ones they got right and wrong and give them an overall score up at the top of the page. And then if they got anything less than a perfect score, we'll give them a link to refresh the page and start over again if they want. If we do, and we will, now that I've allowed for the contact page as well, I'll figure out some kind of process to grab the data from the user and do something with it. It'll probably just, I don't know, echo out their information to the page. Like take their first and last name, concatenate them together and say, hey, Lou Bispo, welcome to our page. So glad you signed up for our newsletter. Or I don't know, something like that. I'll figure it out this weekend. But for those doing the quiz, it's going to start with something pretty close to this. And then, like I said, we'll use it to update the interface over here. So For an introduction to jQuery and JavaScript, I hope that wasn't too much information. And for those of you who've already done programming before, it was not boring. It's always kind of a strike from the middle approach with this stuff. Does anyone have any questions or comments about anything that we just did? Even if it's something like, hey, so could you use JavaScript for X because I had this in mind, or what have you. Anything like that that comes into your minds is fine. Well, okay then. I'll go ahead and put it into the recording here.